Hello, welcome back to the Mo Love podcast. I know it's been some years, 2 years to be in fact, but you know, thought bring back the pod, just to kind of you know think about things as we continue to grow and progress, throughout our lives. So thought I'd revive the podcast. And today's a special day, not only because it's 420, but today's my 29th birthday. So why not, a great time to revive the pod. But for today's topic will be the concept. I know previous iterations of this podcast I've discussed the overall concept of change. But what about when we fear change? What does fearing change, and how does the concept of fearing change or fearing things that are outside of our control, how does that begin to seep into our inner workings as we are changing or wanting to change? Um, Kind of, that perspective of things and how that kind of unravels together. In addition to, of course, we got to talk about the playoffs, playoff basketball. New, my Lakers, were able to steal home court. Was hoping for game 2, but we'll take it on the chin on that. The concept of how, fear of change. Was it right for the NBA to, you know, use Draymond's past behavior, which I think is interesting. One, to I guess question why we would want to use someone's past behavior to punish their current actions, which makes plausible sense. It's what happens in our legal system all the time, our criminal justice system. But just thinking in the sense of in sports is, because we're aware of the kind of player that Draymond is does that mean he needs to change with the game? Change, of course, how he reacts to things. Maybe does he, innately fear that because he knows that's the role he has to play for the team? And if he changes, I guess his approach changes, being the enforcer, that the Warriors will no longer need him. Of course, and knowing that his contract is up this season, I think still giving them glimpses of who Draymond used to be in terms of how the Warriors needed him. But but also in the fact that he's the veteran now, the savvy veteran. So our plays such as stomping on Sabonis's legs, not legs, chest, needed because he stomped and springboard off of him, are needed now in his current role with the Warriors. I think last year for sure, I think that's what kind of catapulted them to their NBA championship last year, and kind of helped them progress in that regard because they needed this squad back together. They needed the Splash Bros again. They needed Draymond. You even had glimpses of Iggy and the Death lineup last year. I mean, I think that kind of what propelled and sparked them to that championship run. But looking at them this year, the whole, punching Jordan Peele fiasco to start off the season, um, the ups and downs in terms of, if he's still got it, the, nagging injuries, that of course come with, father time, but just over time and age and progression of his play. But seeing what type of player does he need to be for the Warriors now for them to contend, because it's looking like the Kings are dog walking them now 2-0. This young, energetic Kings squad led by De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, DeMontis Sabonis. It's very interesting indeed. But just in terms of how does that, fear of change for Draymond, Will it potentially cost the Warriors this series and potentially him re-signing with the team, or does he eventually understand change is needed and he no longer has to fear the change because he can be who he needs to be for now and no longer, I guess, try to impress the team, which I feel like is only right. One, that they end up re-signing both him and Clay regardless, due to what, they increase the valuation of your franchise. They rightfully deserve to retire as Warriors. But, you know, the business of basketball, that's not how it always plays out. So it's going to be interesting how the remaining, the remaining run of this Warriors team, will this be the end of the Warriors dynasty and they kind of rebuild rebuild the dynasty in terms of you keep the core centerpiece that is, either that certainly is Steph Curry. But then look at potentially, do you lose Klay Thompson, both Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, one or the other, um, and try to claw or reclaim old glory in the sense of still trying to revive that team with a new young nucleus that has their own way of playing the game. Does the Steve Kerr system still work? As the Warriors system still work? So I think that'll be interesting as well, and kind of how that plays out. And diving back into the fear of change. Um, and just in terms of, I guess, when thinking about this fear of change, how we, change as people, and fear of being unable to change, um, or feeling like you'll never change or you'll never reach that fullest potential of yourself, and what kind of that looks like. Um, And kind of, I think this delves into kind of the backstory of, how I originally, thought of the podcast in terms of what, you know, the concept behind it, kind of where it stemmed from. It stemmed from isolation, back during the pandemic and feeling as if, you know, what change looked like at the time, what does that look like? How does that look? And then when we are changing, um, or we fear, that we're not changing enough or that we're not changing at all, that we're still, the same mundane task and habits. They just, take a different face to it. Um, but also unknowing, we're allowed to, just be ourselves and not be, anybody else. In the sense of, eye contact. We make eye contact with, many different things, but it's, a thousand blinks. Um, so I think it's being important and being mindful of what are you making, eye contact for and how does that look like for you. It's kind of, how I generally stemmed, kind of coming up with this podcast. And what conversations were needed to be had or what just having a conversation is like. I think even beyond the name, honest conversations. How honest are we really being? How much of ourselves do we conceal? How many secrets have we been, a part of? How many things have we been conspiring in, and involving ourselves, that, no one else knows? I think that's the beauty of, being human and, the journey, um, the overall process. So I think that's necessary too. And then, I'll jump into next, sharing, the concept of sharing a piece of ourselves. And, how does that look like, when we're sharing, you know, the raw versions of ourselves? Do you get that jolt of excitement? that, that rushing wave of adrenaline that just excites you in that moment. But then at the same time, in that moment, you realize that, this is only an element that you only, get to see. Um, we can only see as far as, our horizons, so to speak. So I think that's interesting as well, in terms of, how we share ourselves, what part of ourselves are we sharing. For example, today, I'm sharing with you guys, this recording on my birthday. And birthdays are always interesting for me in that I never was, I guess, not necessarily known how to celebrate myself, but big on celebrating myself. Um, and, you know, what does that celebration look like, Um, because we know birthdays are interesting in the fact that it's just, another day, but then it's your day, it's the day you were born. So it's a ever evolving process, and then you're kind of looking back, but at the same time looking ahead. Um, and this, wave of emotions that come across as you take this glimpse into your life from that current moment you're in, um, is interesting. And then, you try to progress from it, try to take those lessons and move beyond. So I think just being grateful to see a birthday is, of course, the celebration in itself, getting to see the day. But I think also, knowing that yes, it's another day that's celebrating you, but it's also, another day. It's a matter of, how do you make use of it? How does it play into the overall grand scheme that is your life? What glances did you take today? What eye contact did you make on this day that, can propel you, months down the line that you weren't even aware of. The people in the different back rooms that you might not be privy to, but might be, occurring when, when you aren't present. Um, and in that, we're also just different beings. Thing being human in that, we all are all different people in different moments, whether it be as you guys are listening to me, as I record this episode, that person that I am when I'm recording an episode versus, person I am with my family, with my friends, you know, um, currently single right now, but if there was, a significant other to come into the picture, those, intimate moments would, um, what that picture would look like, and that necessarily, I think it's interesting. I was noted myself as a big picture thinker, but now seeing the picture and knowing we won't ever see the full picture, we'll only see different angles of these pictures that we're piecing together. I think it's necessary to take into as well, um, and not getting lost in. I think the overall big picture is that we're all interconnected, but knowing that, everybody that's in your network that you're connected with plays a role, but also it's not, to the detriment of you, or, for the or for you to gain something from it. I think it's just they're playing their role just as you're playing a role in their lives. And just, seeing the ups and downs that come with it is interesting for sure. And then I want to get into next, how do we balance notoriety and notoriety as well as staying anonymous, anonymity and notoriety. How do we balance those two? Um, I think jumping back to, the Draymond incident, we know he's notorious, you know, for being an instigator, being an enforcer, known for, these unnecessary acts, irrational behavior, irrational acts, and how does that notorious image, kind of balance out to, his, personal life? We obviously know that's not the same Draymond, the Draymond who's, on the court as a competitor. We see Draymond now, the podcaster. We see Draymond, the TV studio analyst. You see Draymond, Instagram or Twitter, or whatever. These are just aspects to an overall picture of Draymond that we all won't know. We won't ever know the Draymond that, is its own in his own head, his own thoughts, when he's alone, or Draymond with his family, or Draymond, with his friends, um, etc. Because we won't ever know, and I think that's interesting as well. How do we balance notoriety and anonymity, and that we're all public figures, public figures being a celebrity, star, however you want to see yourself in what light. You're definitely a public figure, but also knowing we're private citizens as well. Um, I think having that balance of public figure versus private citizen, and kind of, what that balance looks like, and how do we manage the two roles, Is it through our means of, social media? Is it how do we, engage with our friends, family, loved ones, and just those meaningful connections that we develop over time? I think is interesting as well. And then to note on, sharing another piece of ourselves, I guess I'll share the story behind the logo of my podcast, Honest Conversations with Mo, um, the Mo Love podcast. But the overall story behind the logo is comes from my heart condition, dextrocardia, and dextrocardia is essentially my heart is a um, well, everything is a mirror image of itself, but my heart's on the other side, so it's essentially inverted. Where typically your heart will be on the left side, mine's is on the right. Um, Yeah, I had to do a quick check. But yeah, mine is on the right side, so it's, flipped. And, I was born that way with my heart being on the other side. The condition is known as dextrocardia. If y'all want to look it up, you want to fact check me, deep dive into it, go ahead. But in the sense of what, you know, I think of my heart condition in terms of how it played a, fundamental role in how I was, how I am myself, and how I continue to be myself. And even those thoughts of, I think I mentioned it earlier, feeling like, can we change in that, or never being able to change. And even knowing, I was born this way, heart on the other side. Instead of, having four chambers, I only have three chambers. I had multiple holes in my heart. But just those aspects of ourselves um, that changed and evolved and grown with us, that are innate to us, um, and that, how do we how do we how do I build on that? And then that's essentially the logo. Um, that's what I was discussing, the logo, but how the logo essentially is me depicting my heart condition, it being inverted, and heart being inverted, um, and that's how that kind of stemmed and arisen as far as the logo, um, and then how my heart condition kind of played a part into that public figure and that private citizen, how it played a role in how I you know evolve and change, but also fear of not being able to change, in terms of, the limits placed on me or the limits I placed on myself, by, the people around me or, just overall society. And I think being mindful of that. And then lastly, I guess I'll close out this episode. I know it's all over the place, as you guys know. I think I was just, glad to get back into it and just, you know, catch up with you guys. If anyone's listening out there, it is here. But for my top four, my favorite album or song currently, well, as you all know, as I mentioned before, I'm an album person. I think the last album that was my favorite was, Twice as Tall with Burna Boy, and that was 2001, 2021, not 2001, 2021. But now in 2023, I've been more of a song person, so that even just that growth. But my favorite two songs are "Need Right Now" by T-Pain, produced by Kenny Beats, as well as Search and Rescue by Drake. First, the Need Right Now by T-Pain. I think I, I'm enamored by that song because of the vibe, just, the jovial nature and energy being radiated through the song and just makes, want to dance, want to have fun. I think the how I kind of came about finding it was also interesting, and I think it refreshed my memory and why, enjoyed watching it, and the production of how the song was made and the overall creation of the song. I think seeing that whole process intrigued me. And now coming back and listening to it um, has definitely furthered further grown that love of the song for me. And then Search and Rescue by Drake. I think that song initially, I think you hear that song, you're thinking in terms of someone wanting to be rescued and saved. But I think for me, how my ears ring for this song is in the sense of um, pretty much where I, you know, I'm a not hope, hopeful romantic in the sense of where I guess pretty much not even just that, but I think where I know when it comes to my romantic relationships, or just my relationships overall, I am Batman who's willing to play Robin, but at the same time knowing, I'm Batman all along, or where I've been willing to play Robin this whole time, but I've been Batman. And I think in this song, it allows me to, I think the elements of Drake's talking about, taking this person out, saving them from, these different lifestyle habits or traits is me essentially to internalizing it for myself and wanting, coming and rescuing myself because I have to be Batman for myself first before I can be Batman for everybody else or being willing to be Robin for others. Um, I think that's why, Search and Rescue by Drake has definitely resonated with me. That song, definitely 100 out of 10 um, in terms of the messaging. If you, I guess, look at it from the lens I'm looking at it, where I'm not saying, although it would be great, to have, a significant other come and, I guess, save me from these aspects of myself. I think it's necessary to do the work to save myself first, because we're all different beings throughout, as I mentioned, throughout every aspect of our day and our lives. And, eventually when I get to a point where, I fall in love with someone who, is this different being, I understand the different being that I am first before I engage with this other different being, if that makes sense. But Definitely search and rescue and uh I lost T-Pain song. Need Right Now, T-Pain, produced by Kenny Beats. You can find the YouTube video, but the song is on SoundCloud. It's a tough find. It's a great song. I hope you guys go digging through the crates for this. Of course, Drake, you can find that in stores right now. But next, what am I currently watching? What show? Um, I guess what would define as a show for me, Gil's Arena, this basketball podcast, starring Gilbert Arenas that features Rashard McCants, Brandon Jennings, and his co-host Josiah Johnson. Um, but essentially, basketball podcast. They give outrageous takes, but also gives you the insight into the mind of NBA players that live this lifestyle, um, and also not wanting to change. I guess going back to this fear of not wanting to change, where you know they don't want to change because they still want to be seen as the guy that dropped 60, 50 points, whatever. Still have that competitor, and then while they're analyzing the current evolution of the game, I think is interesting as well. And then lastly, the last two things, what I have currently going on and what am I looking forward to? Definitely what I have currently going on is, my birthday is today. So, we're going to take in today, the lessons, we take in from today, the contacts that we made, eye contacts, overall contacts, and, just growing and, taking it one day at a time. Yeah, and then just looking forward to, what's next, what's on the horizon for the rest of 2023 for me. As I got these upcoming trips in regards to my job, as far as traveling for work, and preparing and resetting my mind for that. But then also all the challenges that'll come, challenges and lessons for growth as well that'll come, throughout this time as well. And just do my best to prepare myself and, be the best version of myself. But I appreciate you guys for, just listening in. I know this was an impromptu episode. But yeah, thanks you guys for, joining me on this 420. Y'all have a great one. Once again, this is Mohamed Awo, Mo Love, Honest Conversations with Mo on the Mo Love podcast. Till next time, folks. Peace.